So I just wanted to acknowledge the panel and the invitation from STARTS to speak today. I was really looking forward to today, but also acknowledge all the participants who have probably had a long day today at work and under very challenging circumstances, and that you've managed to come here today and participate in this, and just acknowledge the amount of work and the great work that everyone's doing in this field at the moment. Okay, so today I'm really going to talk about the practice development framework at Foundation House in Victoria. It's really interesting in terms of this framework because we've spent the last 2 years really developing the framework and implementing the framework. And it was really interesting when the COVID crisis came into effect. We started to think, how can this framework now be applied and what adjustments do we need to make to support our staff? In terms of the framework, it's very much an integrated trauma-informed approach to providing practice development and also support to staff. It's an integrated approach, so at the centre, it's about developing practice knowledge and skills. It's got a well-being component. It's about obviously at the main point is obviously at the end. It's about providing quality services to client. But what's really important in terms of looking at it from a trauma-informed perspective, it's that concept that to be able to care for other people, you need to be cared for yourself. So we put a lot of resources and support in terms of supporting our practitioners to be able to do what is very challenging work. And I'll go into a little bit more detail through the presentation. The way the framework was developed was very much a consultative process with staff, where we actually looked at what do people need to be able to do their work, what support systems can we put in as an organisation in terms of training, supervision, line management, leadership to support people to do their work. And this really came out of those consultations with staff, and we were lucky enough that we had leadership within the organisation that said we are going to invest in this because it's important. So just to explain a little bit of the framework, how it works, as you can see, the orange circles are very much the line management processes that we have in place as an organisation, which are around providing support to practitioners. And then the purple sections are really the practice development and practice leadership, which is providing reflective supervision to staff, critical reflection on practice, which is our reflective practice approach, and also the implementation of practice leaders who are internal practice consultants that work very closely with staff around their well-being and practice-related needs as well. We've invested quite a bit in an internal training program, so we provide a foundation level course for all our staff, which is really around the needs of their work. It's making sure that we have the right skills and the right evidence base behind the work that we do. So that's a program that we run over 18 months, and we're going through a process now of training all our staff through that program. What's really important to note is this model was developed pre-COVID. And as COVID started to take effect, we started to think about what other supports do we need to put in place. What we came to the conclusion was that we felt that we had the systems and processes in place. It was more, how do we adjust them to the current circumstances that we face now? And this is a very important note to take. I think that this framework is something that should be, to an extent in organisations that work with survivors of trauma, and that will be more required in the future, and is really the model that we now use for our training and consultancy services to other organisations in terms of providing different elements of this framework through training, supervision, or supporting organisations to develop something similar to this within their own organisations as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about trauma-informed practice now. So in terms of the trauma-informed approach, the trauma-informed approach is very much a deliberate approach to develop a system that counteracts the damage that has been done to the people that we work with. So if you look at the clients that we work with, the communities that we work with, there has been a deliberate attempt by a system to break them down at all levels in terms of their identity, at all levels of their human existence. So in terms of a system to be able to work with that or to provide recovery, there needs to be a deliberate attempt to provide a different experience of a system. So in terms of the trauma-informed approach, it affects every aspect of the work that we do at Foundation House, the work with individuals, the work we do in groups, the way we organise the environment and daily routine, and the way we run our organisation, and very important, the way we work with community. So what has become even more evident during this period is actually the importance of community, and we've put a lot of resources and focus on working within community and developing capacity within community through our community capacity building program. So why is it important to have a trauma-informed organisational system? What can happen if you're working with trauma for an extended period of times, and when you've got a lot of pressure coming into the organisation can become a trauma-organised system. What it says here is that traumatic events and chronic stress can produce a similar impact on organisations without intending to do so. Without recognising it has happened, entire systems can become trauma organised. So in some ways, what can happen in an organisation is if it's not deliberately set up to deal with the impact of trauma, it can become very much like the system in which our clients originated or came from. So there needs to be a deliberate attempt within the organisation to set up systems and processes to deal with that impact the trauma can have on our staff, but the organisational system as a whole. So in the context of COVID, what you can see in this diagram is that you see the client who's experiencing feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, fragmentation, being overwhelmed. If we don't have a trauma-informed system in place to be able to cope with this, what you start to see is staff start to feel the same way as a client, and potentially there's a flow-on effect through the whole organisation. So we need to be intentional in terms of developing systems to be able to deal with these parallel processes that could develop within the organisation. So one of the processes we have as an example is reflective supervision. And reflective supervision really has a wellbeing component, but it picks up on some of these parallel processes that can occur where staff can start to take on some of the characteristics of the client. But in the COVID context, it's even more challenging where some people have been quoted to say that I am now living in the world of my client. So not only is the unconscious parallel processes that occur that we start to take on some of the characteristics, some of the experiences, some of the emotional components of our clients, we're also living in a context that we're having challenges ourselves, being in lockdown, working from home, challenges within our family. So this is exacerbated even more potentially in the COVID space. So in terms of the organisational system, we need to consider what sort of things do we put in place in the organisation to be able to buffer that and ensure that the organisation doesn't become a trauma organised system. So one of the processes we have in place at Foundation House is reflective supervision. We use a psychodynamic and a psychodynamic approach that, as well as the 7-eyed supervision model. And the model is very much looking at what is occurring for the client or the community that we work with, what is happening for the practitioner, but also what is happening in terms of some of the systems as well. So it has a systems focus as well. Some very interesting learnings have come out of some of those themes that come out of supervision. And what was quite common during the COVID crisis has been that our staff have felt that they now are living in the world of the client. So there seems to be a deeper understanding of what has occurred for the client in terms of their past experiences. But there's also that challenge where, how do I support someone when I'm not feeling the best myself? I think one of the quotes that's been used was, how do you pull someone out of quicksand when you're not on solid ground yourself? So this is something that has been quite a consistent theme where, and quite an emotional space for people, where we need to really support our practitioners to make sense of the world that we're currently living in, the impact that's having on clients, but also ensuring that the well-being of our staff is also taken into consideration. Another issue that's come up, or a constant theme, has been some of the assumptions we make about the resilience of refugee survivors of torture and trauma. At one extent, in the early days of COVID, some of our clients felt that they were coping quite well, that they had experienced similar things to this in the past. Whereas it was more our practitioners who may have been struggling because they've never experienced something like this. As time moves on, this obviously becomes more challenging, and there's a danger of re-traumatization for our clients. So the reflective space is very important to make sense of some of these assumptions, and also to be able to think about what work can occur, even though the situation is challenging, even though there's many barriers in the way, there is always the opportunity to make meaning and to be able to do therapeutic work. So that has been a constant and a consistent theme within supervision that we're constantly trying to address. The other thing is the opportunity to find meaning together, to make sense of the world that we find ourselves in with our clients. We're having similar experiences now, so there's a real rich opportunity there to really explore what is happening together. There's a richer space for reflection, a richer space for meaning making, and this has become quite common within the work, where we're now provided with some opportunities to have a better understanding as practitioners of what's happening in the world of our clients. The other thing that, and one of the speakers in terms of Annette talked about, was also how we use new technologies and how to be creative in this new space. We've had to really shift the way we do our work with clients and communities. So something we've really worked on in supervision is, how can you still be creative? How can you continue to do the therapeutic work within a different space? How can you be creative in terms of how you engage young people and children and families? So working differently in a different space, but also finding creative ways within some of the limitations that we have under the current circumstances. The other thing that's been really interesting has been the intensity of trauma-focused work. We've found that some people have been a little bit resistant or found it very difficult, whereas others, because of the situation they find themselves, have it's intensified in some ways the relationship with our counsellor advocates, where they've been able to go into that deeper reflection with clients that may not necessarily have been there before. So in some ways, the circumstances in which we find ourselves has provided some opportunity for further exploration, but also in other cases, it's provided challenges in terms of how you can continue to do the therapeutic work when you don't have the engagement tools that you may have had before when we did more face-to-face work. The other thing obviously is dealing with personal challenges and insecurities. So as a practitioner myself, and I know it's part of the makeup of a practitioner, where often we are our worst own enemies, where we want to do more or we feel that we're not doing enough. In this context, this becomes even more challenging, where we start to look internally, and sometimes people may feel that they're not doing enough. So part of the work within supervision is very much to make sense of that for CAs and also our community workers, to be able to remain focused and to focus more on what is good enough rather than what is ideal under these difficult circumstances. So going back to the concept of trauma-informed practice. So this is a bit of a diagram that talks about the organisational system that's required. And this is about being deliberate about the system that you put in place to support staff, but also what is internalised by the clients and the people that come into the organisation. And an important component of this is obviously leadership. Leadership under the current circumstances is critical. And being contained and being containers as leaders is really important. Because everything is internalized by the client and has a flow-on effect for the client. So setting up a trauma-informed system that provides the opportunity for multiple relationships, and also the importance of everyone within that organizational system being attuned to what the primary task is. How do you remain focused under the current circumstances and challenges that we face today? And the primary task of that organisation is critical in terms of guiding any of the decisions that we make at a leadership level and the interventions that we use under these difficult circumstances. So this is something that we have to consider constantly as a leadership group around how do we ensure that we don't lose focus. You can always do more or think that you can do more, but what impact do those decisions then have on the people that we're supporting in terms of the practitioners and then that flow-on effect to clients? So a trauma-informed approach or an organisational systems approach ensures that all the systems and processes are very aligned to that primary task and that we don't lose focus as an organisation. One of the things we did do as an organisation when COVID came into effect was we tried as much as possible to keep all our systems and processes in place. So when we looked at the practice development framework, we tried to make sure that all our training that we had planned to do continued, but in a different way. And this is something that has put on a lot of pressure, obviously, on my team. And we've tried to really ensure that we provide that predictability and consistency for practitioners so that they can have as much of a normal routine as possible within what could be quite a challenging and at times an unprecedented time in their professional life, but also a period of instability. So keeping those systems and processes, keeping your supervision, the same supervision time, the same supervision day, the same supervision groups, your training calendar, all those different elements that we already had in place. We made a deliberate attempt to make sure that we kept those things in place, but adjusted it to the needs of the organisation and used creative ways such as Zoom and other technologies to make sure that those systems and processes were still in place. So just to finalise, I'm not sure how much time I've got, but it'll be interesting to hear from some comments during the Q&A. Just to complete the presentation, this is a very important in terms system for our organisation in terms of the way we support our staff. And really it's become the framework that we now use to support other organisations. So in terms of the sector development work that we do, the way we work with communities, this provides us a bit of a framework to support other organisations during COVID and beyond. And it's also important to consider as well that this or other situations like this are probably going to become more the norm in the future. So organisations need to be able to adapt and start to develop these systems to ensure that their staff are supported into the future.